Hey everybody, it's Eric Murray from thesugarhuddle.com. Today I'm going to talk about Todd Gurley getting that mega contract that I don't think anybody really expected. There's really no talks of him getting a contract extension. It just kind of happened out of nowhere yesterday. Everybody's wondering, is this going to kind of create a revolution in the NFL running back market? And by the way, I wrote an article on that on thesugarhuddle.com, so go ahead and check that out. Just to kind of recap the article, I'm not really sure that's going to create a revolution, to be completely honest with you. I know everybody was, a lot of people kind of scoffing at Le'Veon Bell when he said that he wanted to, that he felt that running backs should get contracts kind of similar to quarterbacks and what have you. He wanted the big money, and when the Steelers offered him 5 years, $70 million, even though only $10 million of it was guaranteed, I think a lot of people were surprised by that as well, and even more surprised that, regardless of the lack of guarantees, that Bell decided to turn it down. But anyhow, then this happens out of nowhere. Gurley gets a 4-year, $60 million deal with $45 million guaranteed, and I think the most interesting part about it is not necessarily how big those numbers are. It's the fact that he's getting offered $35 million more guaranteed than Le'Veon Bell. Now, obviously, there's good reasons for that. Bell's a couple years older. Also, Bell had some off-the-field issues. He's been suspended, for marijuana a couple times. So he's in a position where one more infraction could get him suspended, possibly for the entire season or close to it. And then obviously durability is an issue. Now Gurley had some durability problems in college. He did tear his ACL the 1 year, but he's been fine in the NFL for the most part. And Bell, on the other hand, he's missed 18 games in 5 seasons. Now 6 of that was from suspensions, but still that's 12 other games that he missed due to injuries. So, you look at those things and you look at the fact that he's got a lot of mileage on the tires. He has, I don't remember the exact number, but I know it's more than 1,600 career touches already in 5 years. And again, that's missing 18 games, and he still has that many touches. So he's a guy who's been used up quite a bit. And, from the Steelers' point of view, it's brilliant because, they franchised him last year, and he got over 400 touches, played the entire year. And this year, if he pretty much plays the entire year, he'll probably get something pretty similar, because the Steelers know that now that they haven't been able to reach a deal with him, they're at an impasse, and they know that basically they're probably going to move on from him after this year. So they figure they have no obligation to preserve him, so they'll run him into the ground, literally and figuratively. So he could have another 400 touch season, but either way, if he doesn't miss a whole lot of time, he should be able to get the 350 or 330 touches or whatever he needs across the 2,000 career touches mark. And remember, DeMarco Murray, a number of years ago, he had almost 2,000 touches. I think it was 1959 was the exact number, when he was getting ready to leave Dallas and become a free agent. And he ended up going to Philly, and he signed that big contract, and it didn't work out. And a lot of that was because he wasn't a very good scheme fit, and he kind of bounced back a little bit when he was eventually traded to the Titans after 1 year in Philly. But nonetheless, he wasn't the same player. So, I think overall, the reason why I don't think, Gurley's contract is going to all of a sudden mean that all the top, running backs are going to get 14, 15 plus million a year is because the running back is still the most disposable position in football. You find running backs all over the draft, and you find even, undrafted free agents that can be Pro Bowlers or really good quality starters. And I just think that, if you're an NFL team and, you're pretty good at evaluating running back talent, if you get a guy that's, like Kansas City, for instance, you draft Kareem Hunt, mid to late third round, 86th overall is where he went, and you figure, he's going to get about 3.3 million over 4 years with only a little over a quarter million guaranteed. It was like 775, 952, I think was the exact number, is the signing bonus. That's all he's getting guaranteed. Whereas, like, you think about that 2017 draft, Leonard Fournette, fourth overall, he's getting a 4-year deal that is worth, I think, a little over 27 million. All of it's fully guaranteed. So, if you're really good at evaluating running backs, if you have a specific system, a specific scheme, why not basically draft somebody in the second, third, fourth round, pay them, 2.5, 3, 4, 5 million over 4 years, and then basically if they want too much money after that, then you just let them go. I mean, it's not like having a number one top flight receiver. I mean, I know a lot of people say that, going back to Le'Veon Bell, that he's arguably just as valuable as Antonio Brown, obviously a Steelers star wide receiver. But tell you what, I mean, even though Bell touches the ball more than Brown can make a much bigger impact, and he's still that marquee top flight receiver. I think he's much more irreplaceable than Le'Veon Bell, especially when you consider that Le'Veon Bell's been unavailable for more than a season's worth of games for whatever reasons. And remember the AFC title game against New England 2 years ago, he goes down, early in the first quarter. They didn't have him. So, looking at it, I just think that, with NFL teams, it's becoming more of a pass-friendly league. There's a lot of teams that don't, really have a marquee top-flight running back, and they still win a lot of games. I mean, a lot of teams have been doing kind of the by-committee, 2- and 3-headed monster approach for the last 10, 12 years. You think about the Patriots, for instance. I mean, they've been the best organization in football for the last, 20 years, basically. And other than 2004, when they traded for Corey Dillon, when they brought him in from Cincinnati, and he led the league in rushing, had 1,600 some odd yards that year, and they won the Super Bowl. But outside of that, their other 4 Super Bowl victories and other 7 appearances outside of that '04 season, they've just kind of had a bunch of guys off the street. Now, they did actually draft a running back in the first round this year with Sony Michel out of Georgia, but nonetheless, generally there's just a low value in New England, and it's been fine for them, and a lot of teams the same way. I mean, look at the Eagles, who, speaking of the Patriots, obviously the Eagles beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl this past year, but the Eagles, like the Patriots, I mean, another team that likes to be kind of a pass-first team, and they kind of have a by-committee approach. Now, Jay Ajayi, who they traded for from Miami, is a very good running back, but still, they don't have, what people consider an elite running back, somebody that's going to get paid, this 9, 10 plus million a year. But overall, I just think when, basically you can take somebody late in the first round or after that and get 4 or 5 years out of them, or if you use kind of a by-committee approach, if you're a pass-heavy team, I just think those are the things that are going to happen as far as if people do start giving more running backs, more of the top running backs, 14, 15 million a year, as opposed to now where Devontae Freeman, before the 2017 season, not counting Bell's franchise tag, Freeman was the highest paid running back, a little over 8.2 million a year, and he'd surpassed Shady McCoy, who was making just over the 8 million mark, and there were some other guys that I think were in like the high 6s, and then of course the recent high round draft picks, and you figure they're getting around 7 or 8 million a year if you're talking top 5 or so overall pick. But I just kind of think that if more and more of the top running backs get 14, 15 million a year, what's going to happen is other teams are going to be like, nah, we're not going to do that. If we have a guy that good, we're going to either try to keep franchising him like Steelers did with Le'Veon Bell, or if that gets expensive, basically they'll just kind of have to let him walk or trade him for whatever after 3 or 4 years. Because you look at it, generally, the last couple of decades, teams aren't, again, going back to the Patriots and Eagles as examples, teams, that are winning these Super Bowls, and a lot of times even just getting there, they don't have a whole lot of, great running backs. I mean, you think about Peyton Manning, he had a great running back in Edgerrin James for a bunch of years in Indianapolis, but when he finally made his first Super Bowl and ultimately won it in '06, he had Joseph Adai, who was, kind of an average running back, and I think Dominic Rhodes is the other guy, another guy who's nice running back, but certainly far from elite. And again, pass first team. Ray Rice was a pretty darn good running back, obviously, at the time when Baltimore won the Super Bowl. But even like a team like the Steelers, I mean, they didn't have a Le'Veon Bell back then. When they won the Super Bowl in 05 and 08 and then lost in 2010. Jerome Bettis, obviously a Hall of Famer, but that was the final year of his career in 2005, and he was a backup to Willie Parker, who was a really good running back, but hardly elite. And then after that, eventually those next couple Super Bowl appearances, you had Rashard Mendenhall, who, he was out of the league, I think, after 6 or 7 years, and he never really lived up to the hype. So, yeah, just kind of going down the list of all these teams that have won Super Bowls or even got to the Super Bowl the last, couple, we'll say 20 years or so. You just don't have all these big time players. It's not like it was back in the day, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. Even as the league was becoming more of a passing league, you still had a lot of big time running backs that were on these, Super Bowl teams. I mean, you think about just the 90s alone. Emmitt Smith's the all-time leading rusher. Well, he won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years in Dallas, and he was a huge reason, obviously, for that. And then you think about the Broncos' back-to-back Super Bowls, another Hall of Famer, Terrell Davis. Even the Niners in 94, Ricky Watters, some people would argue he's a Hall of Famer. He was there in 94. And in 99, the Rams won it, and guess who? They had Marshall Faulk, another Hall of Famer. So I just think, until you kind of start seeing a pattern where teams are winning Super Bowls and they have this great elite running back like back in the day, I don't think a lot of teams are going to really be able to justify giving out, 12, 13, 14, 15 million a year, especially on a long-term deal for a top-flight running back. Again, I just think they'll run them into the ground with 1 or 2 franchise tags. They'll just do a really good job of drafting, and they'll replace, running back every 4 or 5 years. And I just think a lot of it's case-by-case basis, too. Again, going back to Bell, Le'Veon Bell is possibly the best running back in the league, and Bell's a really good player, so I don't mean to pile on to Bell, but again, when you have the off-the-field issues and the durability issues, it's kind of hard, to justify giving him a big-time deal because you just don't know if you can trust him. And that's why the Steelers only offered a measly $10 million guaranteed. And obviously, if you're Bell, you might as well take the $14.5 million franchise tag they're offering you because, $14.5 million this year. I think the number was 12.2 last year. So that's almost $27 million fully guaranteed over 2 years. Where a 5-year deal, the Steelers are offering just $10 million total. But a guy like Gurley, he accounted for 36% of the Rams' offense last year. So, the Rams, they don't have like an elite receiving core. Robert Woods is a nice serviceable number 2 or 3 guy. Cooper Kupp, who's a really good draft pick, rookie last year, he's a really nice possession type guy who could maybe emerge into a number 1 type guy. Last year, before he ended up signing with Kansas City, they had Sammy Watkins, and he didn't live up to expectations, not surprisingly there. Tavon Austin, who's kind of an offensive weapon, disappointment. They just actually traded him to Dallas this offseason, and they don't really have an elite tight end either. So, the Rams need a guy like Gurley to light it up, and he's only 24. And Jared Goff, even though he was a Pro Bowler last year and had a great year and bright future for him, still it's nice to have that big-time back that you rely on, especially if you don't have that elite deep receiving core. I mean, even this offseason, they ended up, trading for Brandon Cooks and gave him that really huge contract. But, Brandon Cooks, I don't know. I mean, he's got ran out of New Orleans and in New England because there were some issues that he might not be the best locker room guy, so he might be short-lived there. But, going back to Bell, other than the lack of availability from time to time, again, the Steelers, they have the best receiver, in my opinion, hands down, in the NFL, Brown. Juju Smith-Schuster is one of the best young receivers. And so they've got a pretty deep receiving core. and they have a history of bringing in a lot of really good to great running backs. So I think they kind of look at it and say, you know what, we'll just run Bell into the ground and give him roughly 400 touches again, and that'll kind of be it. So I think as far as some of the existing contracts of guys who were the highest paid, and now they're looking at Gurley's contract, and obviously them and their agents are probably sending gift baskets to Gurley and his representatives as we speak. But those guys like Freeman and McCoy, they're making on average a little over $8 million a year. Probably what'll happen, I think, with those guys and some of the other contracts we'll see in the future is I think the teams will try to kind of make a compromise with those guys and say, look, we're not going to give you 14, 15 million a year, but maybe we can split the difference, meet in the middle, 10, 11, maybe even 12 million a year. So I think that's probably what's going to happen. But again, until we start really seeing a rash of teams that are winning the Super Bowl because they have an elite running back on their roster, till that starts happening, and which is hard to say in a past happy league, but till that starts happening, I don't think teams are going to run the risk of giving 14, 15 million a year. Now, one thing I will say in defense of the existing crop of elite running backs is, Bell for now is still Steeler. They could win the Super Bowl this year. Gurley, Rams could win the Super Bowl this year. Devontae Freeman, he was well on his way to being Super Bowl MVP 2 years ago if the Falcons wouldn't have completely choked that game away. And even on a pass-heavy team, the Falcons knew they needed to give him a big contract because he was so valuable. And even Leonard Fournette, I mean, Jaguars, we'll see, with Blake Bortles as a quarterback, but they almost won the AFC last year, so they're going to be another playoff contender. So those guys are on the teams that could win championships in the coming years. So if we do see that happen, I think you will start to see more justifiable $14, $15 million a year contracts with big guarantees attached to them. So I understand that because these running backs have all that versatility and they can catch all these passes and be every down backs, and put up these big 2,000 plus offensive scrimmage yard seasons and double digit touchdowns. I can get why people are saying that running backs should get the big money, but obviously, as we know, the NFL is the one league where they pay per position. They don't really pay for best overall players like you for the most part see in the NBA and MLB and what have you. But I just think it's one of those deals that I think the smart teams are still gonna look at it and say, you know what, we really can't justify giving out that kind of money, especially if we have a really good offensive lineman, a really good pass rusher, really good receiver, what have you, up for a big extension around the same time. So I was surprised by the Rams giving out that contract, especially the fact that they have to take care of Aaron Donald still. But overall, I think the Rams, they haven't been afraid to dole out cash lately, and so I think they feel like it's worth the risk. We'll see what happens. Obviously, they're pretty married to that contract, but Gurley's a great player, and if it wins him a Super Bowl or two in the coming years, then it's completely worth it. But I think some of these other guys, basically their best bet is to hope that somebody takes a chance on them in free agency and gives them the big money. But the problem is, and I heard Greg Jennings, the former Packer receiver, point this out on that FS1 show, Speak for Yourself, the other day. He said, if when you look at it historically speaking, and he's spot on, teams don't really go after running backs in free agency and pay the real huge money. I mean, you'll from time to time kind of see it again, going back to DeMarco Murray, but generally other teams don't value another team's running back nearly as much as that incumbent team. So that kind of means that a lot of these guys, their best bet is to get that big money from their existing team, meaning Le'Veon Bell's best bet might just be the Steelers. And the downside for Bell is if he has to go somewhere else, it might be a really bad team. It might be a struggling football team that has tons of cap space. How many times over and over again have we seen every single free agent, every single offseason, every single free agency, we see a number of guys that go from really good teams to really bad teams because the really bad teams have the cap space and they can overpay for players. And then a lot of times it doesn't work out because they're on a bad team, or maybe the player themselves, they kind of just mentally check out because they say, well, I got paid, so I don't really care anymore. So I think, again, I just don't really see this becoming a huge trend where the top running backs are going to get paid 14, 15 million a year. Until you start winning Super Bowls with these kind of contracts, even with the ever rising salary cap and the CBA, which will be expiring in 2021, I don't really see that sort of contract with a large amount of it guaranteed like Gurley just got. I just don't see it, other than maybe one or two exceptions to the rule. I still think it's still going to be the $8, $9, $10 million a year for the top guys. You think about it, the last guy before Bell that really said that, I want to change how running backs get paid in the NFL, that we should get paid more like the top quarterbacks and top overall players, was Chris Johnson, the former Tennessee Titan. And, he had just come off of a 2,000-yard rushing season in 2010. In 2011, he was going into the final year of his rookie deal as a former first-rounder. He's only going to get like $1 million that year. And he held out training camp. They eventually gave him a new deal on September 1st of that year, a contract extension on top of his final year of his rookie deal. But he said, he was like, why aren't I getting the $20 million a year that the quarterbacks are getting? Because that's what the quarterbacks were getting at the time. So he wanted basically a 5-year, $100 million deal, which probably like half of it or so guaranteed, $50 million guaranteed. Instead, he signed, I looked it up, it was 4 years, $53.5 million with $30 million guaranteed. It was still a lot of money for anybody, especially running back. But nonetheless, he had to settle for a lot less than what he was really fighting for. And Le'Veon Bell, if he can get more guaranteed money than $10 million, I'd heard that the Steelers were going to give him $30 million the first 2 years, but again, only reportedly only $10 million was going to be guaranteed. If he can get $30 million fully guaranteed in the first 2 years, you got to jump on that for Le'Veon Bell. You're not going to get anything better, or else you might be signing with the Browns or the Colts or somebody down the road. So I don't know, but. Yeah, I think it's still a case-by-case thing, and I think going back to running backs and the lack of Super Bowls recently, Adrian Peterson, best running back of his generation, never came close to winning a Super Bowl. Chris Johnson, same thing. Now, again, that's not all on them because of the teams they were on, but again, they don't have the same impact that quarterbacks have. Franchise quarterback can just work magic. I mean, some of the years, even with Aaron Rodgers, where the Packers were suspect in the way he's been able to carry them to the playoffs. Running back generally can't do that. Adrian Peterson, you could argue he did that in his 2,000-yard MVP season. The Vikings got to the playoffs and won a playoff game, but that's the furthest they could go. So, again, until these top running backs are winning Super Bowls, I think teams are going to find ways to kind of skirt giving them the big money. And again, I think if they can get away with the second and third round draft picks and just doing that every 4 or 5 years, or finding a way to where they can kind of compromise, like with possibly somebody like Shady McCoy or Devontae Freeman, who might want to restructure a deal now. Again, they might have to say, we'll meet you in the middle, 10, 11, 12 million a year is about the best we're going to do. So yeah, I just think that, again, running backs just don't have the same value as receivers. And again, I understand the argument that, well, they're hybrids and they're like a receiver and running back rolled into one, all the yards they gain and everything. But those touches add up really quick. And again, these guys all fall apart by age 30. So, and sometimes even before 30. So again, running back more so than receiver, you're one hit away from not just ending your season, but ending your career. So with a wide receiver, I'll take my chances with, the 16, 18, almost $20 million a year type receivers, the Julio Joneses and the Antonio Browns, and even a head case like Odell Beckham Jr. over the top running backs, because I just feel better about the top receivers staying healthy, and they're going to have just as much of an impact, even though they're touching the ball way less per game. So at the end of the day, it's still all about the quarterback first and foremost. So I think a lot of these top running backs, I think they're probably going to learn the hard way that they could get 15 million a year, but it might have very low guarantees, or there might be a million loopholes. We know how the NFL loves to operate in the gray areas all the time, so it might be a million loopholes in their contracts, injury things. So I don't think this is just going to be all these NFL owners all of a sudden going to say, okay, we'll give these running backs 14, 15 million a year now that, somebody has reset the market. I don't really think there's going to be much of a market reset. I mean, the top running backs 10 years ago were making 7, 8, 10 million a year. That's basically what they're making now, not counting the Bell franchise tag and this new Gurley deal. So I don't really see the running back market having a significant uptick in the next year or so. Now, Ezekiel Elliott carries a lot of risk with his off-field problems, but he's been great for the Cowboys. Maybe in a couple years, Jerry Jones will fearlessly give him a big contract if there's cap space. Fournette in a couple years, Kareem Hunt in a couple years if they continue to do what they did their rookie year last year. But and then maybe even Saquon Barkley down the road if he ends up being all that, the number 2 overall pick of this year's draft, who got $31 million in fully guaranteed money over the next 4 years. So, I mean, he's already making basically highest paid running back type money when you look at some of these old contracts of $8 million a year. But yeah, nonetheless, I don't think this is going to become a trend. So will there be this, market revolution for running backs? I don't think so. I think a lot of teams are still going to get creative in finding ways to still undercut a lot of these running backs. And again, especially some of these pass first teams that kind of have the by committee approaches, why are you going to pay even 9 or 10 million a year for a running back when, you're splitting up the touches? You're talking maybe 200 or so touches a year. So there's only so many of these bell cow guys that are getting the 350 and 400 touches. And a lot of them are very, very valuable to their team. When you look at Elliott, how it hurt the Cowboys, the 6 games he was gone. But even then, you could look at it and say, they really were worse off losing Sean Lee. I mean, Sean Lee missed 5 games that were kind of split up throughout the season, and he was a bigger loss. Tyron Smith, their starting left tackle, so those 2 guys were really bigger losses than even Ezekiel Elliott. So you can kind of justify and then, either way, for and against some of these running backs. And so I think at the end of the day, just again to reiterate, I just don't think there's going to be a salary revolution with these running backs. Again, maybe in a few years, but I just don't think immediately all of a sudden you're going to see these guys who had just signed these contracts a couple years ago getting their deals ripped up and restructured to make way more money. Maybe it'll be restructured where they can get a truckload of bonus money and incentives if they reach all these crazy goals. But as far as guaranteed money and base salary, I don't think it's going to happen. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, Gurley is more the exception than the rule, and we'll see how that contract works out. He's a great player, and the Rams really need him, but we'll see how it works out. But anyways, so those are kind of my thoughts on this, Gurley contract and what it could mean for the rest of the league. Again, go to thesugarhuddle.com and keep up with all the stuff that I've been trying to post. Continuing on the rest of this week with the NFC East previews. Have the Redskins and the Giants coming up soon. Have a video at the end of the week, and then I think next week probably the AFC East. But anyways, just go to sugarhuddle.com, check it out, read the stories, and I'll keep trying to post videos. Thanks.